Let's now switch to Israel. Go to our chief foreign correspondent, Trey Yingst. He's live in Tel Aviv with the latest, not only from Israel, but what do you make of the fact that this appeared to be a pretty limited response, Trey?
Yeah, John, good afternoon. We're getting more information from regional sources right now on this Iranian attack targeting the al-Udeid air base just outside of Doha, Qatar. The latest information that we have, according to the Qatari Foreign Ministry, they say these missiles were intercepted over the Qatari capital of Doha. They say there are no injuries on the ground, and the Qataris are condemning this attack launched by Iran. This is significant, but not unexpected. The distance between Qatar and Iran is just over 100 nautical miles, and this is a large base, the largest American base in the region, and it had largely been evacuated, according to one source that we spoke with before this attack took place. The Americans understood that Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain could be on the top target list for the Iranians in any sort of response following those strikes that were ordered by President Trump to go after Iranian nuclear facilities over the weekend. We're working to get some confirmation about reports that American bases in Iraq may have been targeted. But again, the information that we have about the Gulf is significant. There are air defense systems in Qatar, both the THAAD missile defense system and the Patriot system. And according to some initial video that we reviewed from sources in Doha, it looks like, if not all, but the majority of these incoming missiles were shot down overhead. In terms of what led up to this, we know earlier today the U.S. Embassy in Doha sent out an alert to American citizens in Qatar to shelter in place. Shortly after that, the airspace over this country was closed. You could see on flight radar maps a number of flights diverting to other regional airports. And again, that condemnation coming in from the Qataris. We're also monitoring Iranian state media at this hour, who says that they launched this attack, calling it the Annunciation of Victory. Iranian state media also saying their military says this was a devastating and powerful attack. This is not unexpected propaganda to receive from the regime in Tehran, but again, an indication that the Iranians are looking to save face following this U.S. strike that went after their nuclear facilities over the weekend. Other regional countries, including Kuwait, Bahrain, and the UAE, do remain on high alert at this hour over concern that there could be further attacks on U.S. interests in the region. Of course, the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. There are also thousands of American forces in Kuwait, and then the possibility that Iraq could be targeted as well. I can take you back to 2020 when the Americans ordered that drone strike against Qasem Soleimani outside of Baghdad's international airport. The Iranians responded then with 13 ballistic missiles against the Ain al-Assad air base in western Iraq. And so, of course, missile defense systems across the region remain on high alert. Again, the Americans knew this was a possibility and largely evacuated much of their personnel from these areas. John, Sandra?
All right, just going through the Qatar response here. Qatar saying it reserves the right to respond after this Iranian attack. As John just reported, Qatar is saying no casualties from that attack at the U.S. military base. Thank goodness. And the top security body there, Iran's top security body there, is saying the armed forces used the same number of bombs that the U.S. had used in attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. That is per the latest statement that we've been digesting, Trey. Please do weigh in on that. As John and I were just discussing, is what we're seeing is this evidence of diminished capabilities on the part of Iran?
Look, the types of missiles that the Iranians are likely using against American interests in Qatar, as Jennifer noted, are some from their shorter range arsenal. Cruise missiles or possibly medium-range ballistic missiles, but not the same missiles that they were using over the past 11 days to target major Israeli population centers. A Qatari source just sending me another statement that I do want to just read here live. From a spokesman for Qatar's foreign minister saying, "We reaffirm that dialogue is the only way to overcome the current crisis and ensure the security in the region and the peace of its people remains." And so the Qataris still, amid all of this, encouraging diplomacy and dialogue in the region. They have been one of the leaders in the Middle East over the past more than 600 days, trying to de-escalate regional tension, bring all parties to the table, and ultimately find some sort of off-ramp, ceasefire agreements, or at least temporary understandings. But as this war develops between Israel and Iran, there is concern that this could spiral and continue, because we heard from President Trump directly, we heard from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, that any attack on American interests in the region would be met with a response. Everyone from American officials to current and former Israeli officials warned Iran against such an attack taking place. Now, while this is limited in nature, it certainly does bring this entire conflict into a new chapter and raises questions about how the Americans might respond to this direct attack on their largest military base in the Middle East. This is a base that normally houses around 10,000 U.S. personnel. We have reported from the Al-Udaid base just outside of Doha. It's about a 30-minute drive from the U.S. Embassy in the Qatari capital. And it's a place where there's a lot of coordination for U.S. Central Command. You might remember back in 2021 when those evacuation flights were taking place. Many of them were landing from Kabul, Afghanistan to Doha, Qatar at this airbase. And so it's a base that was built in the late 90s. It cost around $1 billion to build. And it is still owned by the Qataris, but it is, again, the largest American base in the region, and there is close coordination for U.S. Central Command done out of this base. It was largely evacuated before this took place, and again, according to a spokesman for Qatar's foreign ministry, no one was injured in this missile strike launched by Iran. But again, this shows that the Iranians are willing to respond directly to American interests in the region. And even before the war between Israel and Iran erupted 11 days ago, with this Israeli strike starting against the top IRGC officials, Iranian nuclear scientists, and of course, Iran's nuclear program, the United States was preparing for this possibility. You might remember about 2 weeks ago, President Trump ordered a partial evacuation of the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. There was a voluntary evacuation for the dependents of U.S. Embassy personnel and military spouses and children in places like Bahrain and Kuwait. The United States understood that as a war would develop between Israel and Iran, that U.S. interests in the region could come under attack. And of course, with those U.S. strikes against the Iranian nuclear facilities, those 3 facilities over the weekend, the officials here have been bracing for such a response. Israeli officials, though, remain on high alert, understanding that this is certainly not the end of Iranian response as it relates to Israel. But as for American forces in the region, again, the latest information that we can report attributable to Qatari officials is that there were no injuries in these strikes that took place just earlier this hour. And there is initial reporting coming in right now from the New York Times indicating that Iran coordinated the attacks with the American air base in Qatar, and Qatari officials gave advance notice that the attacks were coming to minimize the casualties. Again, that information attributable to the New York Times, but this is not surprising because they did a very similar coordination back in 2020 in response to the killing of Qasem Soleimani, that drone strike that President Trump ordered. This was meant to contain possible escalation in the region. And so we'll work on matching that reporting from the New York Times, but it would not be surprising that the Iranians wanted to coordinate their response as to not drag more officials and militaries in the region into the current war that is escalating between Israel and Iran. Guys?
You know, as you're on the air, Trey, and you probably can't see it, we're getting some pretty spectacular footage of the missile intercepts there. We don't know if it was all just American Patriot missiles or if there were other anti-missile devices that were set up into the sky as well, but it's looking very much like Israel did over the last couple of weeks. Apparently, the Iranians have given this a name, Operation Fatah's Blessing, against the American Al-Udaid air base in Qatar. This question to you. So we saw the response at the Al-Assad air base, and somewhere up to 17 missiles fell on the Al-Assad air base. The fact that this was very limited, Iran says we matched the number of missiles to the number of bombs that were dropped on Iran. We had a number of 6 given to us by the Israelis, which would be far below the number of bombs that were dropped on Iran. I mean, does this suggest that this is merely a symbolic response so that the Iranian regime can say we punched America in the nose, whereas really, I mean, they didn't even ruffle a hair on our forehead?
Yeah, absolutely. And they do this often to try and contain possible escalation in the region. We were on the ground in Baghdad, Iraq, when that other ballistic missile attack took place back in 2020. And there was an understanding that American interests could be moved. There was a warning to U.S. troops to prepare to get into shelters. There were a lot of minor injuries for forces then from the blast of those missiles back in 2020. But this coordination does take place to try and contain escalation. And in terms of Iran's capabilities across the region, it's important to remember that Iran still, despite the fact that Israel and the United States have gone after Iranian interests within their own country, and the Israelis have gone after these ballistic missile launching positions and other IRGC capabilities, weapons storage facilities, for example, the Iranians still have the ability to operate from other countries. They can, through their proxies, these Iran-backed Iraqi and Syrian Shia militias, launch limited attacks with missiles and rockets toward American interests in the region. And there are no reports indicating that that has taken place. And so Iran still has the ability to ratchet up the pressure against American interest in the Middle East. But it appears here they are trying to coordinate some possible response as to not drag the United States more directly into the fight. There's an understanding that the Americans have a capacity and they have weapons that the Israelis do not have, and a willingness, if American forces or interests in the region come under attack, to get more directly involved in the fight. And the regime in Tehran has been extremely weakened following the 11-day campaign that the Israelis have launched not only against their nuclear facilities, but also against top IRGC officials. Remember, in that opening wave, the Israelis took out nearly the entire chain of command for the IRGC Air Force commanders in the Iranian capital of Tehran. We've spoken with top Israeli intelligence officials who have described to Fox News how they are systematically hunting down Iranian officials. And this gives you a sense of how their military chain of command has been decimated over the past week and a half. And so they're still able to coordinate this response. There is an understanding that this is a very large country, more than 90 million people in Iran. And so, of course, they knew that if there was going to be a regional war, it would come in waves. And so they have capabilities. They still can target U.S. interests in the region. But again, it appears today that they've tried to limit this with just targeting initially this U.S. base just outside of Doha, Qatar. And according to reports, coordinate their response as to not drag the United States into the war more directly. Guys?
All right. Trey, also just want to get this in here. Bahrain now says it has shut down airspace temporarily amid fears of retaliation by Iran against these U.S. attacks. Also, Rich Edson reporting for us has just informed us that President Trump is not yet in that situation, the situation room for that security meeting. So we do anticipate that is still happening, but we haven't gotten yet word that he has entered that meeting. Trey, we'll get back to you very shortly.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.